This conference will now be recorded.
Welcome, folks, to the River Management Roundtable and Funding Human-Powered Recreational Access. The debate continues. We have River Management Roundtables a couple of times a month, and this is the final one for this year. So we'll be hearing mostly from David Brown, Tennessee Paddlesports Association Executive Director, Angie Furman, Angie Wave, River Management Society's Training Center Coordinator. Myself, I'm the Executive Director of RMS, Risa Shimoda, and Becca Price, our Communications Coordinator. So welcome, everyone. And this roundtable, our roundtables are drop-ins, meetups. They don't cost anything, and we welcome all those type people. And the nexus is that everybody works on rivers. So if you work on a river, you'll probably appreciate the topics that we talk about, and you're always welcome.
Just before we get started today, we like to be fairly informal during these because we want you to be able to ask questions and speak. So just a couple group norms and agreements is just about, respecting one another and contributing to the process. So if you find yourself speaking a lot, maybe step back and allow some space for other people. But if you have questions, we want to hear from you. This is a time for us to all come together and share our knowledge and expertise with each other. And today we've got David Brown presenting, and then we should have some time for discussion and questions afterwards. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to David. And let me make you the presenter there.
Okay, we good?
We're good.
Well, welcome everyone. My name is David Brown. I'm the Executive Director of the Tennessee Paddlesports Association, which is a relatively small group of outfitters that rent canoes and kayaks, stand-up paddle boards, and tubes to the public on rivers throughout the state of Tennessee. While we're small, we represent the majority of outfitter public user days in the state. We don't do whitewater, so we're not into the guided whitewater issues that are also prominent in East Tennessee, but we primarily are on the flatwater rivers, and we've been part of that upsurge in recreational canoeing and kayaking, especially the kayaking portion that's occurred in the last 20 years. A little bit about my background is I ran the National Association for Outfitters from 1991 to 2017, and was supposed to retire at that point, but that just wasn't in the cards. So I've been actually continued to work in this business since that time as a consultant. Prior to that, I ran regional outfitter organizations, and from 1980 to 85, I had the efforts to save the Oco and the Gauley rivers, which are described in this wonderful book. Just kidding now. But right now we're involved in working on a study that is being done by the Tennessee Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations, which is trying to really kind of sort out the issues with funding, access, and we're hoping it will focus on options to support the growth of private and commercial paddle sports throughout the state. We're operating under permits from the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency, which were authorized in 2018 by the legislature. And that covers anyone renting canoes, kayaks, stand-up paddle boards throughout the state, and tubes too. So that's ongoing. But then in addition to that, we have the state issuing permits for operations in state parks. We even have some cities trying to issue permits. And so we thought this study would be a good way to try to sort through all that and come up with a reasonable strategy and to deal with some of the issues that are emerging, especially in areas where paddle sports are popular in urban areas. So this presentation is going to cover some of the deliberations and issues that we've had to deal with in this process over the last 3 years. I want to start talking a little bit about the state of the paddlecraft industry in Tennessee. We have 90 to 100 businesses renting paddlecraft in the state. There were about 48 people with permits in the 2021 season. The pandemic kind of slowed down implementation of the permitting, but we expect that to pick up. Ironically, the greatest amount of use for our segment is at private access points and state access points, not so much at TWRA access points. I'm estimating, and this is just a guess, 800,000 to 1 million commercial and private paddle user days in the state annually. And that's about, I think it's about 50-50, maybe a little weighted a little more toward the private side. And I'll share why I think that in a minute. The commercial operations occur on about 27 streams and 18 lakes. It's actually a little more than that, but those are the ones that I spent quite a bit of time doing research for this presentation I had to make to the commission, and that's what the web search revealed. About 60 to 70,000 of those user days occur from TWRA access points. And ironically, the most prominent use occurs on about 24 weekend days on about 125 miles of waterways. Now, it's much broader than that, of course, but that's where you tend to get the heaviest amount of use. Statewide, for example, there are 22,000 miles of streams, 29 major reservoirs. So the paddlecraft business is somewhat dispersed, with certain rivers having a prominent share of this industry segment. And what I think has occurred most recently is we've seen an upsurge in non-commercial paddlecraft use. While the professional side has grown, it's just not been as dramatic as the private use, particularly with the advent of stand-up paddle boards, fishing kayaks, and of course the explosion in inexpensive recreational kayaks. And currently, commercial paddlecraft fleets are not growing significantly because it's very difficult, if not impossible, to get new boats because of supply chain disruptions. And 2020, as you know, was an unusual year, but it was not the new normal. It was anomalous, and there was a big upsurge in use in some areas. It wasn't across the country, but certainly in Tennessee, we saw an upsurge in outdoor recreation and paddlecraft use. In some states, the restrictions on groups getting together prevented that from happening, but it certainly was. We had more freedom in Tennessee because canoeing and kayaking was deemed an essential activity as part of an essential recreation. Outdoor recreation was essential, and canoeing and kayaking was subsumed under that. So about 70% from 20 to 21, about 70% of the industry reported that their revenues were down from 20 to 2021. So that's it gives you an indication that 2020 was somewhat anomalous. Now, this is an interesting chart here because I think it describes it's evidence of what some of the things I've been describing regarding the growth of paddlecraft uses. And as you know, in Ohio, they registered canoes and kayaks, both non-commercial and commercial livery kayaks. So over the 10-year period, non-commercial kayaks are this yellow line. They've really grown dramatically, 284%, while livery kayaks have only grown about 52%. You can see the decline in 2020, and I think that's because of some of the restrictions related to the COVID pandemic in that state. Overall, there are about 290,531 canoes and kayaks registered in Ohio, and it exceeds the number of registered power boats. So it's obviously the growth has been pretty dramatic. The livery fleets were about 12,331 privately owned canoes, kayaks were 278,200. It's a little hard to, and they don't register stand-up paddleboards or tubes in Ohio. So, you know, if you add those, you're going to have obviously another segment of participation. Now, the livery boats are used more frequently than the privately owned boats. So, you know, there's more parity when you add up the user days between the two segments. There had been some misconceptions in Tennessee that commercial services, commercial paddle sports were growing explosively, when in fact it was really more the self-guided or the private paddle sports that was growing more significantly than commercial. And there was also this what I call trash talk about you know, by some people who were not happy with the growth of paddle sports, about there being a lot of litter on the rivers, and of course outfitter customers being among those littering. And I've been on all the rivers, almost all the major rivers, and the rivers are remarkably clean. Now the access points are littered, and because there's not a really good program to manage trash at those public access points. The other thing that some people were asserting is that the outfitted trips were high risk, but if you look at the data, which I'll share with you here, outfitted trips are lower risk for beginners than self-guided trips. In fact, the majority of safety problems in our state usually come from private boaters, not from the outfitted public. There are some occasional events among the outfitted public as well. But an example, in 2020 on the Caney Fork, the Smith County Rescue Squad reported 22 calls involving paddlers and fishermen, and of those, only 3 or 4 were outfitted. In 2020, the fatalities in paddlecraft were all non-commercial users. And Coast Guard data shows that about 10% of fatalities nationwide involve rented paddlecraft. And the only reason I'm bringing this up is not to discredit private, you know, the private paddling community, but it's because we had, you know, there've been some assertions that we were operating unsafely, largely from those who are not happy with paddle sports in general. One of the reasons, though, outfitted trips are safer generally is that outfitters know, if you're a resident, outfitters are resident and have experience at a resource, they know when to stop operating, when the conditions are too hazardous for beginners. And a good example is here in this picture. This is 2 strainers that fell into the Harpeth River, and the outfitter stopped operating there. The state park left it open, but the outfitters moved to other sections of rivers until they could get the strainers out. Now, the access points have been an issue. There's or a problem with litter and you know, trash collection. Some places aren't even garbage cans. So our members have been working diligently at the access points that they use to clean up trash, and generally participating in river cleanups when those occur with Harpeth Conservancy and others. And so I think the paddle sports industry generally leaves rivers cleaner and not littered as some have accused us. But you do get. I started an event called National River Cleanup Week back in the 90s. At one point, we had 50,000 volunteers. Risa knows about it because she helped me get some sponsors at one point. But what we discovered in conducting those cleanups is that there's a lot of trash and street runoff in urban areas and urban rivers, but a lot of people will drive up to bridges and throw batteries over bridges, engine blocks, shopping carts. So that's a point of, and of course, then it'll wash down into the mainstream stem of the river. And so that's one of the places you'll find a lot of garbage at times. Now, all this growth has obviously resulted in a few user conflicts. And I think those are manageable without suppressing use. And I want to cover a few ideas here that we've developed and are asking the TACIR committee in the state to consider. There are congestions at boat ramps on summer weekends. We had these one-lane boat ramps that were designed in the 50s and 60s, and everybody tries to launch it, at basically a 2-hour window in the morning and take out a 2-hour window in the afternoon. And on these popular rivers, the parking lots are full. There are people parked up and down the side of the roads. There are some user conflicts between paddlers and fishermen. If you look at this picture, you can see 3 wade fishermen out there and kayakers launching as well. Some of the trout fishermen are not particularly happy with paddle sports. And we need funding for access improvements, and I'll explain that here a little bit further. But this is an example of a put-in or access point, TWRA access point on the Caney Fork River. Cars line the road on either side up and down for a 2-hour window. Now, these are not outfitter customers. These are, private non-commercial customers, but you can see how the demand, especially near urban areas, has grown, and we need to make some accommodations and or improvements to these access areas. So one of the solutions we think obviously is access improvements at existing ramps to reduce user conflicts, where we segregate fishing and boating. Non-motorized on the Caney Fork at that access point, they're actually power boats putting in when they're generating, and canoes and kayaks putting in. They're all using the same boat ramp, and so that results in some occasional user conflicts. And there are also best practices to reduce user conflicts, which we had to adopt when we started addressing this issue, and that's essentially, don't leave your boats on the boat ramp. Don't stage on the boat ramp. Stage off the boat ramp. If you have to use the boat ramp, if you can use an area adjacent to the boat ramp, but certainly don't stage and leave your boats on the ramp. Now we can do that. It's easy to get those best practices implemented among outfitters. It's a little harder with private boaters, and so we're hoping, to use social media and get social, certainly to get, some of the social media sites to help with this education. And we've got to develop funding sources for improvements. This is one of the trespass warnings that's printed on a tube by one of our members to, make sure that people are aware that the riverbanks are privately owned and not to get out on the riverbanks. So it's another best practices that we've employed. And this is an example of the issue that I was talking about, where use of the boat ramps creates congestion. In fact, this was posted on a fishing website. As you can see, the outfitted kayaks and boats are on the side here, left of the picture. This is a private party here in the middle, and obviously it took them a while to get launched, and so the fishermen were complaining about them blocking the boat ramp. And so, one of the ways to deal with this is to develop an access point to either side, use best downstream of the boat ramp, so that kayakers don't even have to use a boat ramp. This is that same, well, no, this isn't the same access point, same river. And it's an example of an area that an outfitter started using that's away from the boat ramp. You can see the boat ramp up here in the right corner. And they were able, just with a little weed whacking, to develop a little launch area here away from the boat ramp and avoid a lot of the congestion. So this is one of the interim solutions. It's not the final solution, but it's part of the mix, using adjacent areas adjacent to launch ramps, implementation of best practices, respect for fishermen, and we're telling our people to be very helpful in assisting inexperienced paddlers to clear the ramps, so we can avoid some of those user conflicts. So what we're supporting, this TACIR study, we're certainly hopeful that we can avoid any new fees or regulatory processes until this TACIR study is completed. And again, the TACIR study is a Tennessee Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations, which is made up of state legislators, city and county officials, that's studying the paddlecraft issues in the state of Tennessee, for those of you who may come on a little later. And we're looking, we have the highest sales tax rate in the nation in Tennessee. It's almost 10% of gross. So we're hoping that if there are any additional fees associated with our use, that we'll get a credit on sales tax for those fees. Now that's going to require legislation. We can't just, the TACIR people can't do that. Multi-year permits is also an important factor. The state parks is doing that, which is good. TWRA permit, they have the authority to do it, but right now they're only issuing permits for a 1-year term, which makes it a little dicey for someone running a business. Now, it's not, there's not really a problem getting the permits, but, obviously if there are any changes, could be a significant issue. So we need to really come up with some sources to modify these revenue to modify these access points. And so there needs to be a plan developed, and that's where the TACIR people, because they're interagency, we're hopeful will be, and most of these places are not federal, they're state managed. They'll be able to come up with some ideas both for local governments and state agencies, TWRA and TDAC, to develop revenue sources. Could be Land and Water Conservation Fund money, could be some new sources from the state outside of Land and Water Conservation Fund, which is comes from the feds, but there has to be a matching amount usually for local governments. And so there's several options that need to be in play. And we also have a lot of private landowners that are providing public access now. They need to be recognized, and their contributions need to be safeguarded in some way so that we don't lose those access points. There are some federal initiatives in play. One was in the infrastructure bill in Title 8, which authorizes a study of the use of non-motorized vessels in each state and how the increased use of non-motorized vessels is impacting motorized and non-motorized vessel access. And then also it addresses study of user conflicts at waterway access points, and the use of the sports fish restoration program, which is Dingle Johnson, Wallet Bro money, I think, as you know, to improve non-motorized access and then the recreational boating safety program funds for non-motorized boating safety programs. So that's going to be an interesting study. It's supposed to be done within a year. So that'll be interesting to see the outcome of that. And it's almost like it was tailored from the situation in Tennessee, but it's going to really apply. It will study every state. For those of you who are involved in this issue in your state, you might want to, I'm sure you'll be contacted by the group doing it. And as I mentioned, I think the duplicative fee and regulatory authorities certainly are a threat to our folks. It was the #1 concern in a survey that we did among paddlecraft businesses. And so we're hopeful that at some point there'll be some consolidation of permitting so that we aren't, in some cases, we have people operating out of county parks, that would have to have a TWRA permit, and in some cases, a state permit as well under the current regulatory regimen. For us, the guiding principle moving forward is that people of goodwill and good faith can work together to solve user conflicts and issues without eliminating access. And with that, I'll close and thank you for your attention.
David, can you
Go
kind of define what your outfitters are? Are these people that just rent stuff on a beach within a Tennessee state park type area? Just a lot of us deal with a much different definition of what outfitters are.
Yeah,
I'm just a little confused.
I'm sorry if I didn't explain that at the start. Yeah, it's paddlecraft rental businesses. And, it's not, as I mentioned, it's not the guided kind of whitewater outfitting. This only applies to paddlecraft rental businesses, canoes, kayaks, stand-up paddle boards, and tubes.
But it's like my rental businesses aren't on the forest per se. So, it's like not considered outfitters, have no control over them. And, when they go into my numbers, they're considered non-commercial boaters because, although they're rental people, I don't get to say how they obtain that craft when they step onto the national forest. They're just non-commercial boaters.
Well, the interesting thing about this regulatory, and this is in the legislation, it exempts outfitters who have Forest Service permits. So if someone's renting and they have a permit, now it sounds like your folks don't have permits. They're operating without a permit. Is that correct?
Well, that's the thing. No, we don't issue permits to rent craft. We don't have the space once we have whitewater outfitters that take people in boats and guide them. We don't really feel it's a great section of whitewater for rental boats and people trying to guide it their first time with no experience on rivers. But we do have people at both ends of the canyon that rent whitewater rafts to people to take themselves out whitewater rafting with no skills yet. And so those are the what we call would consider liveries. But there's as the regulating as the agency, we have no say over them as they're not on the national forest. They don't operate, they don't drop off or anything. People who rent from them, tie the boat up to the top of their car with baling twine and come down to the river. And, they're just a non-commercial boater with a rented boat when they show up on public lands. And so
they
set up.
Under this regulatory authority, they would have to have the TWRA permit. Because they still, because they're operating a rental service and they don't have a federal a Forest Service permit. They would still fit under the regulatory TWRA regulatory authority.
Okay.
Which includes, just quickly, it includes stuff like you have to have insurance, you have to do a customer orientation. They actually specify what the customer orientation includes. And you know, you have to inspect your boats. You have to do reporting, use data, among the other requirements.
Risa, you're muted.
We thought you were just mumbling to yourself, talking to yourself.
Thank you, Becca. Who will be doing, for the legislation you mentioned, who will be doing the asking, the counting, the analyzing, this is really big for us.
Yeah, it is. I think it is big. You know, I have that in it's in the legislation, which I could pull up and I'll send it to you. But it's part of the, I think it's part of the group that runs the sports fishing restoration money, but I need to confirm that. It says in the legislation.
Okay, now I can look it up.
But so that's part of why this, you know, there's so many initiatives going on around this, you know, this kind of explosion in canoeing and kayaking, that everybody's looking at, you know, regulations or fees or something, and it's not coordinated. And so we're hoping that and maybe that study will help do it as well, but certainly at the state level, this TACIR study is designed to help do that.
I will tell you, that big increase, I think, in the number of paddlers with their own gear versus that are using those outfitters. A lot has changed massively in just how one obtains a paddle craft anymore. You know, it used to find that kind of, you know, small business that sold some plastic boats, and there weren't very many of them, and there was a tiny shop somewhere that may be 2-3 towns away. Is much different now because you can obtain some form of kayak in so many places now, in all these big box stores. And the ability to, you know, just like, yeah, you can get a sit on top nice plastic kayak for, you know, for your $400 at Costco. Why not throw one in the basket? And just that access to find, you know, cheap boats anymore. Everybody has them in their garages now. They're not renting them when they go places now, because it's almost a better deal if they're $100 a day to just buy that $300 one. At least that's from what I can see from here. That's
behind that graph that you showed. You know, the non-growth of the liveries, because you can't get a tube for $10 or whatever. So, yeah, you know,
that's one of the issues, creating some management issues, is that I think y'all probably are aware of the accident that occurred on the Dan River this year, where the tubers went over the dam. 4 of them, last I heard, it was 4 fatalities. But a lot of these places that are selling tubes, including, you know, without discrediting anybody, but, you know, Walmart's was selling, had an end cap full of $5 tubes when I went in the store one time. But there's no safety information that I can tell. You know, maybe it's in the box, but and then you do have places selling kayaks that don't even sell life jackets. And so you get people buying these boats without really understanding even the basics. And so I think that's another issue. That's not part of my deal or this study per se, but that's one of the things that the National Association of Boating Law Administrators is looking at. Mm-hmm. And I think some point of purchase materials, you know, just on river hazards alone. We have posters that we give our people that, you know, include all the orientation requirements for TWRA. It's on our website, tnpaddlesports.com. You can go and download them for free. But that's one of the things that probably needs to happen is some point of purchase information for people, at least to help them understand what they're getting into. Encourage them to get, a little bit of education at least before they get out on the water.
That's challenging to talk to a big box store when you want them, when you know that they're selling the sport as for anybody and super easy, and heaven forbid they indicate that there might be some risk associated with paddling. But I agree. One of the reasons I asked about who was doing the study is that it's a little bit like roosters managing the hen house. When those who collect the fishing and hunting license tax or the fees and have spent it on fishing and hunting and now are looking at taking that same money and spending it on something else too. But I guess
Well,
it's good
I think
that
I think they may be anticipating an excise tax on paddling gear. I mean, would be the logical conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
There's a 10% tax on fishing equipment at the wholesale level, which funds the Sports Fishing Restoration Act. That's Dingle Johnson. And then they also do marine fuel tax, Wallop Pro, that goes into that fund. So, I mean, I don't know who sponsored that study, but if I had to guess motivations, that would probably be what they're looking at some point.
Yeah.
This is Buck. They're also, I think, looking at registering non-motorized watercraft on an annual basis, and that'll impact users considerably.
Now, that would be at the state level, though, not at the federal level, right?
Right. But it is being looked at the state level.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, I know it is. It would be, but it would have to be authorized in Tennessee by the legislature. And I think that's going to be a hard sell to the legislature in Tennessee. There may be some other ways to, provide the funding, but I don't know that boat registration's going to fly from non-motorized vessels in this state.
I wish it were that optimistic.
Yeah, and where fees have been recommended and have not passed, it's usually because there has been very poor or no designation of where the money's going to go. So Ohio, a few states are very well thought out, but most states are not. Any other questions?
I do have a quick question. My name is Andy Demetrio. I'm the owner of Blue City Kayaks. We do rental tours and kayak rental tours in the Memphis, Tennessee area. Does the TWRA even have the authority to levy any kind of fees for water access?
They do have it for paddlecraft rental businesses, but it has to be approved by a government operations committee. And I don't know, what their plans are for certain, but I believe we won't see anything until after this year when they gathered some data. Now, they're not required to wait for this study to be completed, but I think the sponsor, state senator who was sponsored the study, is also the chairman of the committee that has to approve their fees. So I'm not sure he'd be happy with them kind of getting the jump on the fees before the study's done. But I mean, that's just a guess. So I don't know. I haven't talked to him about it.
And are they talking about fees to actually just access the rivers? Or are they talking, there's a big difference in boat registrations at the state level versus fees to access waterways just for the sake of putting your boat in the water. One of them seemed, I'm not an attorney or anything, but it seems like it'd be a violation of the Commerce Clause. And I'm wondering if there's anybody that's pursuing that avenue to try to prevent these fees from happening.
Well, there is a law called the Maritime Transportation Security Act, which passed in the bill that established Department of Homeland Security, and it reiterates a provision that was passed actually way back in something like 1878 in the Rivers and Harbors Appropriations Bill that prohibits fees, non-federal fees, on passengers, vessels, or cargo on waterways under federal authority, except as necessary to provide security, safety and security. And so that has been used on several occasions where entities tried to establish fees for use of the waterways, basically, either on the persons or on the boats. And at the non-federal level now, that would be like counties. And what was happening way back in the 1800s is these steamships were going up the Hudson River, and every time they docked, the local jurisdiction was dinging them for their cargo. And we saw this starting to occur even in outfitting, where the Youghiogheny outfitters would float from one county to the next. Each county had a fee on them, and so that legislation passed, and I think it was kind of sponsored by some fishing interest, because they were having the same problem as they went from one jurisdiction to the next. But anyway, it passed, and it's been actually tested in court in Tennessee and elsewhere. So that would prohibit fees just for use of the river. I think that, there's likely to be, unless there are a lot of different ways to slice this apple. In Virginia, they did a study. They discovered that 93% of the people using their access points were actually already paying in some way. In Tennessee, and in Tennessee, you have a lot of people that are going canoeing and kayaking that have fishing licenses. So those people shouldn't also be paying for use of the boat ramps, because they've already paid when they bought, their fishing gear and or fishing license. So it's a complex issue, and there are different ways to slice the apple. I mean, there's got to be some support for these facilities, but there are different ways to do it, and it's got to be done in a more disciplined way than kind of a feeding frenzy that seemed to be erupted. But I do agree with you on the boat registration would be tough. I mean, in a kayak, I used to work for a manufacturer, rotomolded back in the late 80s. You put the hull number in with a hot pen, and it doesn't take long for that thing to get dinged up and be unreadable. And trying to keep up with those registration numbers for canoes and kayaks. Now, they do it in Ohio, but they do a 3-year registration for $25. And $5 of it goes to access, and then 20 of it goes to just to the state boating people. But that's the way they do it, and that's not something I'm recommending. Certainly for Tennessee, but I don't think it would be very popular in our state.
It's not popular in any state, at least when you're chasing whitewater rivers over 3 or 4 states, 5 states in the summer. Gets kind of expensive.
Yeah, and we've had some discussion about the excise tax, which I think is the smartest way to go, but it would be a nightmare, and a lot of people wouldn't want to do it now because it seems like an extra cost that would be passed on to consumers. But the taxes that you've mentioned, David, were passed so long ago. Nobody's alive now who was there when they were passed. So, to talk about the effect of passing them. They were from like the 50s, right? Well, we were alive, but they're so long ago.
Well, and it's a little different situation too, because the sports fisheries restoration funds, we're talking about fish stocking and, maintaining game for consumptive uses. That's a little different, and then of course you've got the access points, which deserve, got to be funded somehow. So, but there are two different sort of issues here, and that's what part of what's got to be separated out. I mean, the trout streams in Tennessee are not natural. I mean, they're non-native species, and they have to be restocked constantly because species can't procreate in the water conditions. And so that's a different animal. And but I do hear, we've got one adversary saying that, oh, we're paying for, all this fishing stuff. When truth is, they didn't pay for the dams or the land under the dams or the cold water that's being released. So it's a totally different situation.
Right.
But you got to keep those fishermen happy because, getting those wallop row funds from your state depends on your local fishermen being real happy, and those connections are critical when you need a new ramp and you need those wallop row funds, and those can cover a half a big access facility, and those are some of my favorite funds to go after because they're obtainable, and they can't just that phone call from the state game and fish going, well, what do you need? 300, 400, 500,000? What is it going to be? And I like phone calls like that, better than people that want to screw around for 10 or 20,000.
Well, there has to be something that, we've got to get these boat ramps modified, and we need more access. So there has to be some way to do it. And, I think we have to do it so it doesn't, kill the sport. But whether that excise tax angle at the wholesale level is the way to go, I'm going to wait to see, what shakes out in this TACIR study.
It's not hard to fund a facility, but or redoing a facility. The problem is maintaining and staffing facilities. And truthfully, when you get into facilities like was in your slides, that it really does come down to somebody that can remind people to move over there, or please open up the middle of the ramp because other folks need to get up or down it. And that's it's even harder when you're collecting fees or something from the public, especially, that they need to see things that are clean. They need to see things that are well managed or whatever, if you're asking them to take money out of their pocket. And you definitely I would explore some type of partnership. We use a lot of things, not on some rivers around here. Ambassadors programs are a big one that are used a lot anymore, where there's not funding or whatever. If you can get one person that can manage 10 ambassadors to be out there managing stuff that we should be paying somebody for, we use a lot of volunteer ambassador programs to make things happen. There's also partnerships can make those things happen at your river facilities when government can't come through or there's not money to make anything else happen. And really recommend pursuing those types of things when there's not the possibility of the state or the agency or whatever covering stuff. But that increase of use is so brutal right now, and there's it's kind of the last chance to put up any defense.
Well, we're looking at an adopt a ramp program, kind of like adopt a highway program.
Mm-hmm.
And some of our people have done that already, but we could formalize that. They actually, if they weren't weed whacking the boat ramps and picking up trash, it wouldn't get done.
Mm-hmm.
That's cool.
Yeah. It's,
Any other suggestions? Or a few people have been quiet. Barb or Jennifer, Tony, been quiet. If you're from different states or how you're dealing with this, because it's a big issue in every state and everybody's doing it a little differently.
It's an interesting topic to hear about, Risa. And Dave, I want to circle back with you about whoever agency you have a contact with that has like $500,000 for boat ramps. They sound good. in Utah, we have a really curious situation. On the Green and Colorado River, we have the concept of what's called a navigable servitude. These are navigable for tidal with a capital N. And that essentially means that we are obligated by the public trust doctrine to ensure public access to rivers while simultaneously being unable to encumber the public with fees or revenue generation. It's a beautiful catch-22. And so the onus for ramp construction and maintenance generally falls to the upland landowner who's proposing an access point. I'm working through this right now with county government who really wants to improve a boat ramp in the area. They hold the permit for the boat ramp, and they want to make it a nicer place. Right now, it's archaic concrete. It's falling in the water. It's overrun with weeds. There are code violations and congestion, you know, and we're not allowed to charge people ramp fees. Essentially, is like to boil it down in a nutshell. So we're trying pretty hard to figure out ways to generate revenue for projects like this. And short of the typical boating access grants that I think come from ultimately U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and administered through our state wildlife agencies, there's not a lot of money out there. So I don't know the topic of this conversation, who should pay for it. Rationally speaking, you would think the users should pay for the impacts they create, but we're in a tough spot there. Thoughts?
You know, there's a lot of money from infrastructure, and I'm not sure there are any in these pots, but we're finding, the state has got a lot of money either through COVID or, funds that, we're looking at using, and hopefully we could get authorized for some of these purposes. But I don't know in your state what the situation is, but I think that one thing I think the River Management Society could do, maybe you've done it, but would be to kind of outline these funding options for people. And, both from river conservation, for Land and Water Conservation Fund all the way down to what's available, because there've been so many things authorized recently, and I'm not sure we all have a good grasp of what's available.
It's a good idea. You're on mute again, Risa, for talking to yourself.
I'm talking to myself again. Are there very many places or any where this is kind of a weasel way to get around it, where access is free, but you have to pay for parking? Is the Upper Ocoee like that? I feel like there's been some places, some things like that, but I can't remember where. So essentially you're paying for access.
Beautifully efficient, Risa.
Well, that's basically what federal fees are for most rivers, at least for Forest Service, they're just parking fees.
Mm-hmm.
They used to have that on the Ocoee parking fees, but they
Right.
went away.
Oh, they did. That's what I remember on the upper. Remember?
Well, it was down on the lower too. They had a contribution box, but so paddlers being paddlers parked on the road instead of in the parking lot.
Right.
So they didn't have to pay the fee.
Including me. So one project that we're going to start is the state of Oregon, in an effort to pass the fee that they implemented in 2019, did a national survey of states through the state boating law administrators that asked them a bunch of questions on how access is funded. And they have this awesome data from 2017, so it's old, and they've given us their old stuff so we could do another survey. And we've been looking for funding to get an intern that could do this, and we haven't been successful. So I think we're going to just go ahead and do it. And we have agreement from NASBLA that they would field it, and agreement from SOBA, State Organization of Boating Access, to field it. So we'll do that survey this year and hopefully have input on just what folks are doing. May not give us any answers, but it should give us the state of what states are doing. And yeah, hopefully that will get us some good information. And we have, so this kind of seems far away, but it's not really. We'll have a symposium in March, the beginning of March to the end of February 2023. And that would hopefully be a time that we share this information in San Antonio or New Braunfels. We're not sure what it's going to be. Well, any other questions before we kind of close out? It's getting to the bottom of the hour. Dave, you're getting ready to say something?
Oh, I was just going to point, years ago, my whitewater outfitters gave up on waiting for Forest Service funding to come down from Congress. And, just started, they all raised their prices $1 and basically donated $1 per customer to a account the Forest Service could use for providing the basic infrastructure to have a actual river program functioning. So, their buses could get to the ramps and get people off the river, that type of stuff, and bathrooms could be actually installed, be cleaned, that type of thing. Their people could get back to town in time for their dinner reservations. They paid for river rangers to be on staff to keep things moving, but basically, still get about $100,000 in donations a year.
You still do that?
Still do that.
Do you know of any other forests that do that? That's pretty slick.
No, I don't. Well, this is just a kind of really great group of outfitters that are like, see the big picture stuff of, they make money if people have a clean restroom that's, that their customers can use, and that they can, they see the value in having river rangers on staff. They see, they see the value of having safety response, rescue response, all those types of things, and what it means to have the the local search and rescue all adequately trained with Swiftwater, stuff like that. They're happy to pay for and donate money for.
So at the federal level, there's the fees that are approved through the Federal Lands Recreation Enhancement Act, amenity fees, are used for that. So those are available at federal level. It's when you get down to the state level and local level, you've got some of these resources are seeing 10, 15,000 users a year, and so it's not going to generate a ton of money, even if you're doing something like $1 a head. I mean, it'll help certainly, but for some of these modifications of the ramps, we're going to need certainly broader base funding than that.
That's the beauty of having this for years, though, has been, it's like if I have nothing to start with going after grants, I'm not going to get any grant money. Just having even $5,000 in an account that I can chase a grant with, I can bring in 10 and I can make that 10 20 and that 20 40 and the 40 80 and the 80 160, and I can even back out my first $5,000 and nobody will notice. But I wouldn't have that without, for years I couldn't do anything without, if I didn't have my outfitter donation account with that money on the outside of the federal coffers. I know you need to bring this to an end.
It's hard to interrupt such good conversation, though. And that's the point of these roundtables, is to share information like this. And well, I did want to just quickly say thank you to David again for the presentation, and just let everyone know we did record this. So if you missed any parts and you want to check it out, we'll have it up on our video page, which you can access from the River Training Center page and RMS website. Oops. And then also, just check out the River Training Center page. We've got a lot of things planned for this upcoming year.
Series